They say respect has to be earned, that talent alone isn't enough. But in the brutal, unforgiving world of Hollywood, your resume means nothing if you can't prove yourself when the cameras roll and the stakes are real. New York City, 1967, a cramped police precinct set. Frank Sinatra, the biggest entertainer on the planet, walking onto a film set where he wasn't wanted. And Robert Duvall, the most intense method actor of his generation, refusing to even look at him. What happened over the next 8 weeks would force one of cinema's greatest actors to confront his own prejudice. And it would prove that sometimes the people you dismiss are the ones who teach you the most important lessons. This isn't a story about fame. It's about the moment a legend had to prove he belonged, and what he did to earn the respect of a man who thought singers had no business being actors. This is the untold story of the detective, and it starts with two men who couldn't have been more different, forced to work together in one of the darkest films either of them would ever make. New York, September 1967, the first day of rehearsals for The Detective. Frank Sinatra arrived at the production office at 10:00 a.m. exactly on time, wearing a perfectly tailored suit and his signature fedora. He was 51 years old. He'd made over 60 films. He'd won an Oscar. He was Frank Sinatra. He was Frank Sinatra. But to Robert Duvall, sitting in the corner of the rehearsal space, reading the script with the intensity of a man preparing for surgery, Frank was just another celebrity who thought acting was easy. Duvall was 36 years old. He'd studied at the Actors Studio under Sanford Meisner. He'd worked off-Broadway for years, barely making rent, dedicating himself to the craft with monastic devotion. He'd only recently broken into film with To Kill a Mockingbird and The Chase. Every role was sacred to him. Every line was a battle to find truth. And now he was about to work with a nightclub singer. The director, Gordon Douglas, a veteran who'd worked with everyone from James Cagney to John Wayne, called everyone together. "Gentlemen, we're making something important here. The Detective isn't a typical cop film. It's dark, it's complex. It deals with corruption, sexuality, violence. This is going to challenge all of us." He introduced the cast. Frank nodded politely to everyone. When he got to Duvall, he extended his hand. "Bob, looking forward to working with you. I saw you in Mockingbird. Great work." Duvall shook his hand briefly. "Thank you." His voice was flat, professional but cold. Frank noticed. He'd been in this business long enough to know when someone didn't want him there. They started the table read. The script, based on Roderick Thorpe's novel, told the story of Joe Leland, a New York detective investigating the murder of a gay man while confronting corruption within his own department. It was raw, brutal, unflinching. Frank read his lines as Leland with a quiet intensity, not performing, just reading, letting the words speak. Duvall read his part as Netter, a violent homophobic detective who represents everything corrupt about the system. His reading was explosive, aggressive. Every word felt dangerous. Gordon was pleased. That's exactly the energy we need. Joe and Nestor are opposites. Joe is trying to find justice. Nestor just wants blood. After the read-through, the cast dispersed. Frank went to grab coffee. Duvall stayed behind making notes in his script. Jack Klugman, who was playing Dave Schonstein, Frank's ally in the film, sat down next to Duvall. "You got a problem with Frank?" Duvall didn't look up. "No problem." "Then why are you treating him like he's invisible?" Duvall put down his pen. "Because this is serious work, Jack. This isn't a musical. This isn't a nightclub act. This is about character, about truth. And I don't know if he can handle that." Jack laughed. "You're kidding, right? You know, he won an Oscar for From Here to Eternity, right?" "That was 14 years ago," Duvall said. "And it was one role. Since then, he's been doing comedies with Dean Martin and singing on TV specials. I don't know if he's still an actor or just a celebrity playing one." Jack shook his head. "You're making a mistake, Bob. Frank's the real deal." "We'll see," Duvall said, going back to his script. The first week of shooting was tense. The film was being shot on location in New York City. Real streets, real precincts, real grit. Frank arrived every morning at 6 a.m. in full costume, makeup done, lines memorized. He was known for being a one-take actor. He didn't like to rehearse endlessly. He liked to prepare thoroughly, then trust his instincts and go. Duvall's process was the opposite. He wanted to rehearse, he wanted to explore, he wanted to try different approaches, different line readings, different motivations. He was method. He needed to live in the character. The clash was inevitable. Their first scene together was in the precinct. Frank's character Leland confronting Duvall's Nestor about using excessive force during an interrogation. Gordon called for a rehearsal. They walked through the blocking. Duvall wanted to try the scene sitting down first, then standing, then moving around the room. "Let's just shoot it," Frank said quietly. Gordon looked at him. "You don't want to rehearse? I'm ready now. Let's capture it while it's fresh." Duvall spoke up. "I'd like to try it a few different ways first." Frank nodded. "Okay, you do what you need to do. I'll be ready when you are." He walked off set, not in anger, just giving Duvall space to work. Duvall noticed. It felt like dismissal, like Frank didn't care enough to engage in the process. They rehearsed for another 20 minutes. Then Gordon called Frank back. "Okay, we're ready." Frank stepped into the scene. Gordon called action. What happened next surprised everyone. Frank delivered a performance that was completely different from the rehearsal. Quieter, more dangerous. He spoke his lines with barely contained rage, his voice low, his eyes cold. He wasn't playing a detective. Every gesture, every pause, every moment of silence was loaded with history, with exhaustion, with moral compromise. Duvall responded instinctively. The scene came alive. The tension was real. Gordon called, "Cut. That was perfect. Print it. Moving on. One take. That's all Frank needed." Duvall stood there processing what had just happened. He'd spent 20 minutes exploring the scene, and Frank had walked in and nailed it in 60 seconds. It should have impressed him. Instead, it frustrated him. Jack Klugman walked over. "Told you." Duvall didn't respond. The pattern continued throughout the first 2 weeks. Frank would show up, do his preparation privately, then deliver flawless performances in 1 or 2 takes. Duvall would work intensely, exploring, digging, sometimes needing 5 or 6 takes to feel satisfied. Gordon was fine with both approaches, but the crew started to notice the tension. Frank and Duvall didn't speak between takes. They didn't eat lunch together. They didn't bond. One afternoon, after a particularly difficult scene, Frank was sitting alone in his trailer when there was a knock. "Come in." It was Gordon Douglas. "Frank, we need to talk about what?" Gordon sat down. "About Bob Duvall." Frank lit a cigarette. "What about him?" "He thinks you don't respect the work." Frank exhaled smoke. "Why would he think that?" "Because you don't rehearse with him. Because you do 1 take and walk away. Because you're not engaging in the process the way he needs to." Frank was quiet for a moment. "Gordon, I've been doing this for 25 years. I know how I work best. I prepare, I show up ready, I deliver. That's my process. If Bob needs something different, that's fine. But I can't change who I am to make him comfortable." "I'm not asking you to change," Gordon said carefully. "I'm asking you to meet him halfway. This film needs both of you. It needs your instinct and his intensity. But if you two can't find a way to connect, the film suffers." Frank stubbed out his cigarette. "What do you want me to do?" "Show him you care. Show him this matters to you." Frank nodded slowly. "Okay, I'll try." The next day, Frank found Duvall sitting alone on set during a lighting break, reading his script as always. "Bob, you got a minute?" Duvall looked up, surprised. "Sure." Frank sat down next to him. "I want to talk about our scene tomorrow. The interrogation room sequence." Duvall's eyes narrowed slightly. "Okay, it's a tough scene," Frank said. "Your character is trying to break the suspect. Mine is trying to stop you without causing a scene in front of the brass. There's a lot of subtext." "I know," Duvall said. "I've been working on it." "I know you have," Frank said. "And I respect that. But I want to make sure we're on the same page, so let's talk it through." Duvall was surprised. This was the first time Frank had initiated a conversation about the work. They spent the next 30 minutes discussing the scene, character motivations, backstory, the dynamics of power and corruption. Frank listened more than he spoke, asked questions, took Duvall's ideas seriously. By the end of the conversation, something had shifted. "Thanks for doing this," Duvall said quietly. "Of course," Frank said. "We're making something important here. We both need to be invested." The next day, they shot the interrogation scene. It was brutal, intense, and it worked beautifully. The chemistry between them, the tension, the barely suppressed violence, it was all there. Gordon called cut after the first take. "That's it. That's the scene. Print it." Frank and Duvall looked at each other. Something unspoken passed between them. Not friendship yet, but acknowledgement. Week 4 brought the film's most dangerous sequence, a rooftop chase. Frank's character pursuing a suspect across New York tenement rooftops. Real buildings, real heights, Real danger. The stunt coordinator, a man named Hal Needham, gathered everyone for the safety briefing. This is tricky. We're 4 stories up. The gap between buildings is about 6 feet. We have pads on the ground, cables for the stunt doubles, all the safety measures. Frank, we have your double ready. Frank shook his head. I'm doing it myself. Howell frowned. Frank, no offense, but you're 51. This is a young man's stunt. I'm doing it myself. Frank repeated calmly. Gordon stepped in. Frank, there's no shame in using a double. We do it all the time. I know. But Joe Leland wouldn't use a double. He'd make the jump. So I'm making the jump. Duvall was watching this from across the roof. He'd been listening. And for the first time he saw something in Frank that he recognized. Commitment, pride, the refusal to fake it. Hal tried one more time. Frank, if you miss, if you slip, you could break bones or worse. Frank looked at him steadily. I won't miss. They set up the shot. The camera was positioned to capture the full jump. Frank stood at the edge of the first building, looking across the gap. 6 feet. Not impossible, but not safe either. Gordon called for quiet on set. Frank, you don't have to do this, I know. Okay, let's roll film. The camera started. Frank took 3 steps back, focused, then ran. 3 strides and he launched himself into the air. For a moment he was suspended, 50 feet above the street, nothing but gravity and faith. He landed on the other rooftop hard, stumbled forward, caught himself, kept running just like the scene required. Gordon called cut. The entire crew erupted in applause. Frank walked back across the rooftop, breathing hard, adrenaline pumping. Duvall was standing there staring at him. You're insane, Duvall said. Frank smiled. Maybe. Why'd you do that? Frank looked at him. Because I needed to know I still could. Duvall understood. It wasn't about proving something to the crew. It was about proving something to himself. That was one of the bravest things I've ever seen an actor do, Duvall said quietly. Frank shrugged. It's just a jump. No, Duvall insisted. Most actors, hell, most people would have taken the easy way. You didn't. You put yourself on the line. He paused, searching for the word. That's real. Frank extended his hand. Thanks, Bob. Duvall shook it, and this time he meant it. The rest of the shoot was different. Duvall stopped treating Frank like a celebrity, pretending to be an actor. He started treating him like a colleague. They had lunch together, talked about scenes, shared stories about their different paths into the business. One night, over drinks after a long day, Duvall asked the question that had been bothering him. Why do you do it, Frank? You're the biggest star in the world. You could do easy movies, musicals, comedies. Why take on something this dark, this difficult? Frank swirled his drink. Because I'm an actor, Bob. That's what people forget. They see the records, the Vegas shows, the Rat Pack stuff. They think that's all I am. But I've always been an actor first. And actors need to challenge themselves. They need to grow. If I just did the easy stuff, I'd die inside. Duvall nodded slowly. I judged you. Before I even met you, I thought you were coasting on fame. I know. How'd you know? Frank smiled. Because I've been dealing with that my whole career. People think singing and acting are different things. They're not. They're both about truth, about connecting with an audience, about making them feel something. The medium doesn't matter. I was wrong about you, Duvall said. And I was wrong to be distant at first, Frank admitted. I could have reached out sooner, could have shown you I cared about the work. I was being stubborn too. They sat in silence for a moment. You're one of the best I've worked with, Duvall said finally, and I've worked with some greats. Frank raised his glass. Right back at you, kid. They drank. 2 men from completely different worlds, completely different approaches, but the same dedication underneath. The detective wrapped in December 1967. The film premiered in May 1968, to strong reviews. Critics praised the performances, particularly the chemistry between Sinatra and Duvall. The film was controversial for its frank depiction of homosexuality and police corruption, but it was also respected for its honesty. Years later, in a 1982 interview for Inside the Actors Studio, Robert Duvall was asked about the most important lesson he'd learned in his career. He thought for a long moment, don't judge people by their resume, judge them by their work. When I started The Detective, I thought Frank Sinatra was just a singer playing at being an actor. I was completely wrong. He was one of the most committed, most talented actors I've ever worked with. And he taught me that there's more than one way to approach this craft. My way isn't the only way. Sometimes the guy who looks like he's not trying is actually the one who's prepared the most. The interviewer asked if Frank knew how much Duvall respected him. Duvall smiled. I told him near the end of the shoot. And you know what he said? He said, "I know, kid. I could tell when he stopped walking away every time I showed up." The audience laughed. That was Frank. Duvall continued. He noticed everything. He just didn't make a big deal about it. He let you come to him. He let you realize on your own what he was capable of. That's confidence. Real confidence, not ego, just quiet certainty. Frank Sinatra died in 1998. Robert Duvall attended the funeral. He stood in the back, watching as Hollywood's elite paid their respects to the chairman of the board. Later, someone asked Duvall what he was thinking about. I was thinking about a rooftop in New York, 1967, watching a 51-year-old man jump 6 feet across a gap 4 stories high because he refused to let a stunt double do his job for him. That's the Frank I'll remember. Not the singer, not the celebrity, the actor who put everything on the line every single time the camera rolled. Today, The Detective is considered one of Frank Sinatra's finest dramatic performances. It showed a side of him that audiences rarely saw, dark, complex, vulnerable, and it proved that he was never just a singer who wandered into movies. He was an actor who happened to sing. And sometimes the people who doubt you the most become the ones who respect you the deepest. All you have to do is show them who you really are and be willing to